you? Talk to me. Yeah, thank you. I'm so happy to be back tonight. I wasn't here last week. I missed you guys. So I'm back tonight. This is our fourth series in the lecture. And so really excited to be here and get going tonight. Got a couple of announcements, so bear with me. We just want to remind everybody that the Food and Literacy for All is free and open to the public. We do ask that you reserve so that we can make sure that we have enough room space here for everybody's comfort. We have free rides between Detroit and Ann Arbor. You can contact Kabibi Dorm from the Food Policy Council. Kabibi will be here in attendance for some of our classes, and you'll be able to meet her personally. And as always, I have a car. I'm always willing to share a ride with anyone that wants to carpool. We have coming up tomorrow between 5:30 and 7, the student town hall, which is the role of food and carbon neutrality at U of M. The university is attempting to reduce their carbon input. So any of you that may be interested in that, we welcome you to join this on Church Street. Rooting for Change is tiny talks about food justice. I think the students can actually apply and they get like 5 minutes to do these speed talks. And I believe this is the one that they get $75 if they're chosen. So that should be fun. That's March 19th. We're looking at a student hunger initiative. This is an organization right here on campus fighting food insecurity. And so we invite you all to take part of this. This is February the 12th, which is next week, Wednesday, at Mason Hall. This is this coming Saturday in Kalamazoo, the Michigan Food and Farming Systems. MIFS is a Small Family Farms Conference. It's an annual event. This year, we're blessed to have Kapal as the keynote speaker. You know, she was here last week. I missed her, so I get to see her Saturday. I believe there may be scholarships for anyone who is really interested in attending. Just go out to the website, and you can make contact directly with the MIFS team, and they'll be happy to accommodate you. I know that we have some buses leaving from Detroit Saturday morning, about 5:30 in the morning, and I believe there's one leaving from Ypsilanti as well. There is a local food summit at Washtenaw Community College. This is Monday, March 9th. This is serving the greater Washtenaw County, and again, it may be something that you may want to participate in. And I believe this is the one where Leah Perriman will also be there as the keynote speaker. So we're betting 100 this year. Save the date. Detroit Food Policy Council Summit, Food Summit is Thursday, March 12th through the 13th. We have volunteer opportunities for extra credit for you all, and there may be potentially some scholarships as well. So mark your calendars for that. As always, we want to thank our sponsors. Without their support, this lecture series would not be possible. And so, again, we want to give a shout out to them. Thank you. And so now, I invite Cindy to come up to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everyone. I actually have one more quick announcement, and that is a sickness policy. So because we're in the middle of flu season, if you are feeling ill, if you just don't feel like yourself and you need to miss class, that is perfectly fine. Please contact our GSIs and we will make accommodations for you. We really don't want you coming to class if you are sick, and because this is also cross-listed in public health, let's just remember everyone should stay healthy and take the necessary precautions. So it's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Robert Lustig to University of Michigan. He is a colleague and a friend of mine. His title is a professor of pediatric endocrinology at the University of California, San Francisco, or UCSF. He's a neuroendocrinologist by training. He graduated from MIT and Cornell University Medical College, and prior to joining the faculty at UCSF, he was on faculty at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the University of Tennessee. His research focuses mostly on the impact that sugar has in fueling the epidemics of diabetes, obesity, and metabolic syndrome, and how can we change the food environment and food policies to reverse chronic disease. His YouTube video, Sugar, the Bitter Truth, which was a lecture that he gave to the UCSF community. So this is an hour-and-a-half lecture on sugar and its effects on insulin and obesity. It has over almost 10 million views as of today. So I don't know of any other academic lecture that is as widely watched as this one. He's also the author of 2 books, Fat Chance, The Hidden Truth About Sugar, Obesity, and Disease, and The Hacking of the American Mind, The Science Behind the Corporate Takeover of Our Bodies and Brains. He has also almost 200 peer-reviewed research articles in top medical and public health journals. So get your clickers ready, because I do have one question. Which one of the statements about Dr. Lustig is false? A, he holds a master's degree in public policy. B, he traveled to Ann Arbor from Paris. C, he's a cookbook author. And D, he's a native of Brooklyn, New York. All right, get your votes in. So the correct response is A. He does not have a degree in public policy. He actually has a degree in law from UC Hastings. So welcome, Dr. Lustig.
Thank you. So cute. Oh, that's so cute. I love that. Thank you, Cindy. Cindy and I go way back, many, many years now, and we have published together, and it is truly my pleasure to be here at her insistence. Indeed, insistence. And I have many other friends in the room. Dr. Susan Maples, who is a public health dentist in Lansing, so she is local, and someday she's going to give this talk up here for you as well. And Erica and Lily, who I've been on the emails with like crazy over the last couple of weeks. So anyway, my pleasure. So this is food literacy for all. The problem, of course, is that we are quite food illiterate. And the question is, why is that? And I'm going to make the argument tonight that this is very much planned. They want you to be food illiterate, because then they win. And tonight we're going to debunk a lot of junk, and we're going to basically put the onus where it belongs. And you will see how we do that over the course of time. So it's called corporate wealth or public health, and you will see why that is the case. So I do have these disclosures. I did write these 2 books for the general public, and I also am the chief science officer of a nonprofit in San Francisco called Eat Real, where we are bringing real food to schools, and you will see why that is in a moment. We have gotten rid of 270,000 pounds of sugar from one school district in 1 year. So, Jamie Oliver, eat your heart out. So, the reason I am here today is this statement was by Dr. Jeremiah Stamler, father of cardiovascular epidemiology, famously said, "If a researcher isn't willing to follow his data into the policy arena, who will?" So, I started out as just a plain old, standard academic, publishing journal articles having nothing to do with the public. And it wasn't until 2009 that I gave my first public lecture. Just so happens it's been watched 10 million times. Do not understand that, okay? I would have worn a different tie if I had known. Nonetheless, it's brought me to where I am today. So tonight we have a a very stock-full agenda, and I have only so many hours to do it. So, we're going to talk about the problem, the 3 myths of the food industry, you'll see why, the dark forces behind it, and finally the solutions. We got to move fast. So let's start with the problem. This paper came out in 2001, and it argued that in 2000 there were 151 million type 2 diabetics walking the planet, and that projected for 10 years later there would be 221 million. That would be a 46% increase, or an annualized inflation rate of 3.88%. That is not what we saw. In fact, what we actually saw was 285 million for an inflation rate of 6.55%. That's a doubling in what was anticipated. And over the course of the next 4 years after that, 422 million for an annualized inflation rate of 10.3%, a tripling in what was expected. WTF. The only way to explain this is that doctors cause diabetes. And actually, there's some truth to that. Because if you take a look at what's gone on over the course of the last 30 years, heart disease has actually gone down, in part because of things like statins and things like the plasminogen factor that busts clots, et cetera. But take a look at what's happened to diabetes. It's just gone through the roof. And the question is, why is this? Now, if you look at hospital costs here in red, physician costs in green, and pharma costs in purple, they do not add up to the total costs in blue. And the reason is because the rest of it is going to the care and treatment of chronic metabolic disease, such as diabetes. And the question is, how do you fix that? Well, this is how you fix it, except this is where everyone's online. And guess what? It don't work. Because if it did work, we wouldn't have this problem. They're relying on you to think it does work. It doesn't work. And it never will work, because when you actually look at the subcellular pathologies involved in these diseases, they are not druggable, but they are foodable. We will never have a drug for this, because there's no drug for it. There's no pill for this. Nonetheless, we are spending a whole lot of money, and here you can see health costs against life expectancy, and this is the United States compared to the rest of the world. Now, they're not all doing that all that well either, but take a look at us. I mean, we are just, the dregs. So, ultimately, is it pills or public health? And I will tell you right now, there is no pill for this, and there never will be. What we have forgotten is these 2 inconvenient truths that unfortunately drive this metabolic healthcare debacle. Number 1, there is no rational medical therapy to prevent chronic metabolic disease. There's just long-term treatment, and guess what? The treatment doesn't really work, because I just showed you the diabetes data. The second is, you cannot fix healthcare until you fix health. You cannot fix health until you fix diet, and you cannot fix diet until you know what the hell is wrong. And we have gotten it wrong over the last 50 years, very specifically, because they wanted for us to get it wrong. And that's where the 3 myths come in. You all believe these 3 myths. So we're going to quiz you at the beginning of each of the 3 myths. So get your clickers out. So the first myth, it's about obesity. So here's your question. Which predicts metabolic syndrome, that cluster of chronic diseases that attend obesity, best? Total body fat, subcutaneous fat, visceral fat, liver fat, or brain fat? Everybody? Weigh in, weigh in. Looks like visceral fat is winning. Well, guess what? You're wrong. It's liver fat. Indeed, that's why we're playing this game. So, everyone thinks obesity is the problem, right? So on this slide, we have obesity prevalence country by country on the x-axis versus diabetes prevalence country by country on the y-axis. And you would look at this and you would say, well, very clearly, Dr. Lustig, there is a correlation, and indeed there is. I don't argue that there is a correlation. But correlation is not concordance. They're not the same thing. Because there are countries that are obese without being diabetic, such as Iceland, Mongolia, and Micronesia. And there are countries that are, whoops, whoa, what happened there? And there are countries that are diabetic without being obese, such as India, Pakistan, and China. India and China today have an 11% diabetes prevalence, and they're not fat. We are the fattest nation on earth, and we have a 9.4% diabetes prevalence. If obesity is the cause of diabetes, how come they have more diabetes than we do? Problem number one. Problem number two. Obesity is increasing worldwide at the rate of 2.78% per year, whereas diabetes is increasing worldwide at the rate of 4.07% per year. If diabetes is just a manifestation of obesity, how can it have a higher percentage? Problem number two. Problem number three. On this slide, we have the secular trend in increased incidence of type 2 diabetes in the US population over 25 years. Here's the total here, and over here we have it stratified by BMI, by weight. Okay, and what you'll see is that there's been a 25% increase in incidence per year in the obese. Fair. But there's been a 25% increase in the normal weight population too. If diabetes is a manifestation of obesity, how come the normal weight people are getting diabetes just as fast as the obese people? Problem number three. And there are about three other reasons as well. I just don't have time to go into it, and they require a little more science. So obesity is not the problem. People do not die of obesity. Obesity isn't even listed on the death certificate. What is? Well, metabolic syndrome. These are the diseases that cluster with obesity. Type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia. Okay? They travel with obesity, but they are not obesity, and they are what costs the money. 75% of all healthcare dollars. And here's the list, of which diabetes is the sentinel disease. So this is the most important slide I'm going to show you tonight. Okay? And if you don't get this, nothing else will make sense. On this slide, we have a Venn diagram of the entire US adult population. 30% obese, BMI over 30, 70% normal weight, BMI under 30. Everyone in this room is in one of the two circles, and you know who you are. The standard mantra from the doctors and the dietitians and the Surgeon General and the Institute of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health and the White House and Congress and the food industry is the following. 80% of those obese individuals, 80% of 30%, these 57 million people, they're sick. They're fat, and they're sick because they're fat. And if they would only just diet and exercise, we could solve this problem. That's what they say. Garbage. Total, complete trash. Dare I say it? Bullshit. Why is it bullshit? Anyone? It's on the slide. Well, it is true that 80% of 30% are metabolically ill. I don't argue that. That is true. That means 20% of 30% are not. They are metabolically healthy. We have a name for them called MHO, metabolically healthy obese. They will live a completely normal life, die at a completely normal age, not cost the taxpayer a dime. They're just fat. Conversely, and this is the important one, 40% of the normal weight population have the exact same diseases as do the obese. For the exact same reason, they're just not obese. Normal weight people get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia too. And they get them for the same reason. They're just not fat. And when you do the math on 40% of 70% of 168 million, you get 67 million thin sick people, calling the 57 fat sick people the problem. And When you do the math, that's more than half the US population, which makes this a public health crisis. And if normal weight people get it too, how can it be about behavior? This looks more like exposure. This looks more like influenza or tuberculosis or cholera or HIV than it does behavior. And I'll prove it to you. So on this slide, we have two CT scans of two equally weighted people. Notice trunk fat 12.8. One's healthy, one's sick. Any radiologists in the room? Perfect, good. Okay, so which one is sick, A or B? I heard A, I heard B. I heard both. It's B, sorry, it's B. Okay? A, he's just got big love handles. Subcutaneous fat, big butt fat, if you will. B, he's got visceral fat, big belly fat. Okay? The bad fat that you've heard about, the apple versus the pear. And we have a name for this. It's called TOFI, T-O-F-I. Thin on the outside, fat on the inside, real medical term, 1,500 Medline citations, coined by Dr. Jimmy Bell, University College London. So my question to you, sitting here right now, to all of you is, are you a TOFI? How would you know? How could you know? Does your doctor know? If your doctor knows, why hasn't your doctor told you? And what would you do about it if you did know? This is the problem. And until we solve that problem, nothing else is going to change. And it turns out it's not even TOFI, it is the liver. And I will show you that as well. So here we have normal liver. Nice sinusoids, bile canaliculi, Kupffer cells, all good. And over here we have fat vacuolization, macrophage infiltration, the beginning of scarring. This is called fatty liver disease. The problem is you don't know if this is alcoholic fatty liver disease or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Before 1980, if you saw this under the microscope, that was alcohol, plain and simple. But today we have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and guess what? 18% of children have it. And they don't drink alcohol. And by the way, 45% of adults. So where'd that come from? And how come in the span of 40 years, from 1980 to today, we've gone from a disease that was never heard of to 45% of adults? You want to talk about epidemics? This is the epidemic. Okay? Forget the rest. Forget coronavirus. This is the problem right here. And fatty liver disease does not distinguish based on weight, because here's BMI prevalence less than 25, and look at the NAFLD prevalence around the world. So it's not just in the obese, it's in normal weight people too, because normal weight people get sick also for the same reason, because they have fatty liver. That was the question I asked you at the beginning. Remember the quiz? Okay. Whoops, sorry. And you can see that here. Here's normal weight, overweight. Here's a signal, even in the overweight. Yeah, sure, the obese have more. I agree. Okay. And here's no diabetes versus diabetes. Okay. In fact, if you have fatty liver, you are 3.5 times more likely to develop diabetes because of your fatty liver. Because when your liver's sick, your pancreas has to make more insulin to make the liver do its job. Because the pancreas is in series with the liver. So when your liver gets sick, you get sick. And when your insulin goes up, you gain weight. So it turns out the weight gain is a manifestation of your sick liver. And I'll prove it to you. So here we have an obese person. Okay? This is called MRI Fat Fraction Maps. Here's an obese person, but I want you to take a look at this guy's liver. 2.6%. It's dark. Normal. This is metabolically healthy obese, MHO. Nothing wrong with this guy. I wish I was as healthy as this guy. This is more likely what you would expect to see. Here's obesity. Look at that liver, 24%. This is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. This is metabolic syndrome. This guy, gonna die. And then finally, take a look over here. Thin, notice, no love handles, but take a look at his liver, 23%. Thin sick, fat healthy. So you tell me who's the sick one in this room. You don't know, because it's not the fat you can see that matters. It's the fat you can't. In fact, that's the key to the kingdom. It's not about obesity, never was. It's about metabolic dysfunction, and anyone can get it. And obesity is a result of that dysfunction, not a cause, and 88% of adult Americans have metabolic dysfunction of some sort. That's the problem. So, have I dispelled myth number 1? Myth number 2, a calorie is a calorie. After all, we're just engines, right? You pour the stuff into a big funnel, and it goes down, and it gets burned, and it doesn't matter where the calories come from, right? So here's your quiz. Everybody get ready. Fructose increases liver fat by, number 1, increasing obesity. Number 2, increasing visceral fat. Number 3, by increasing de novo lipogenesis. That's fat making in the liver. Number D, reducing exercise. And E, by making the brain think it's starved. Let's see. What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? So we got C and E vying for supremacy. Actually, they're both correct, but C is actually more correct. Okay, but there's truth to E as well. So here's the fiction. Okay, who here watches football? And don't tell me you don't. This is Michigan. In 2013, Coca-Cola ran a 2-minute video at every football telecast the entire year called Coming Together. And in that, they said this: beating obesity will take action by all of us based on one simple common sense fact. All calories count no matter where they come from, including Coca-Cola and everything else with calories. So you can get your calories from carrots, you can get your calories from cheesecake, you can get your calories from Coca-Cola, or you can get your calories from kumquats. Doesn't matter. Because if you eat more than you burn, you will gain weight. If you eat less than you burn, you will lose weight, because it's about energy balance, because it's about calories in and calories out. Therefore, it's about 2 behaviors, gluttony and sloth. Therefore, if you're fat, it's your fault. Therefore, every calorie can be part of a balanced diet. Therefore, diet and exercise. Therefore, don't pick on our calories, go pick on somebody else's calories. All of those come from this simple, common sense fact that calories are fungible, that it doesn't matter where they come from, like dollar bills. Every dollar bill is worth the same as every other dollar bill. Okay? Every calorie is worth the same as every other calorie, right? And it's common sense. Well, I don't believe in common sense. I believe in science, I believe in data. And what the data say is that some calories cause disease more than others because different calories are metabolized differently in the body, because a calorie is not a calorie. And I don't have time to go through all of these as to why, because I'm looking at the clock and going, uh-oh. So we'll take it from there. This is the primary source of the problem calories in our diet. Our ancestors getting fruits and vegetables with the occasional honey out of the ground or out of trees in 1820 consumed about 4 pounds of sugar per year. Here we have the growth of the sugar industry during the 19th century, C&H, Domino, etc. Okay? Here we have stabilization prior to World War II, when price equaled demand, supply equal demand, excuse me, and here's the rationing of World War II. We came up to the same level, and here's the advent of processed food in about 1965, and then we had also the first dietary guidelines, and we had the substitution of high fructose corn syrup for sugar because it was cheaper. Everybody thinks high fructose corn syrup is the devil. It is not. It is just as much of a devil as sucrose. The difference is it's cheaper, because it's homegrown. It's half the price. And because it's cheaper, it found its way into everything. So it's not metabolically evil, it is economically evil. Okay? It is the reason for chewy cookies. Okay? Got it? All right. So sugar is two molecules, glucose and fructose. They are not the same. Glucose enters the liver and gets converted to this guy over here called glycogen. Glycogen is liver starch, and glycogen, for lack of a better word, is safe. This is the reason marathoners carb load before a race, is to build up their glycogen stores. Okay? And as long as it goes to glycogen, no big deal. Now, some of it will make its way down to the mitochondria, will be burned in the mitochondria through the Krebs cycle. If there's excess, it will be thrown off as citrate, and that citrate will exit the mitochondria through a process called the citrate shuttle, and then will act as a substrate for these three enzymes here. ATP citrate lyase, acetyl-CoA carboxylase 1, and fatty acid synthase. These are the three enzymes of de novo lipogenesis, new fat making. This is how your liver turns sugar into fat. And you will end up with fatty acyl-CoA, which then gets packaged with ApoB to form VLDL, or triglyceride, which then gets exported out and serves as a substrate for either heart disease or for weight gain. But most of it ends up as glycogen, so no big deal. And 80% of it ends up being metabolized by all the organs in the body, because every organ in the body has a glucose transporter. Every cell on the planet can burn glucose for energy. That's how important glucose is. Now, it's not important to consume it, but it is important that you can make it. So they say you need sugar to live. Well, you don't need dietary sugar to live. You need a blood glucose to live. But because it's so important, your liver will make it even if you don't eat it. So people on the keto diet who don't eat any glucose, they still have a serum glucose because their liver made it. Everybody got it? So you don't need sugar to live. You need a blood glucose to live. This is alcohol. Now notice, when alcohol enters the liver, it does not go to glycogen. Where does it go? It comes straight down to the mitochondria. You throw off a lot of citrate, you make a lot of VLDL. Some of it will make it out, but some of it won't. Some of it will precipitate as a lipid droplet. And now you have alcoholic fatty liver disease. And when you have that lipid droplet, now your liver doesn't work so well. And now your pancreas has to make extra insulin to make the liver do its job. And now you've got metabolic illness, which is what alcoholism does. So finally, here is fructose, the sweet molecule in sugar, the molecule we seek, the molecule that is addictive, the molecule that is not glucose. Okay? And what it does is, you see glycogen anywhere? Nope, don't go to glycogen. It comes straight down here to the mitochondria, just like alcohol did, gets thrown off as citrate, makes that VLDL. Some of it will make it out, some of it won't, and now you have non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. In addition, fructose 1-phosphate ends up causing the insulin receptor to be dysfunctional, so now you have insulin resistance. When you have insulin resistance, now you can't phosphorylate this guy here called FOXO1, so you end up with high glucose, and so you have hyperglycemia, which leads to type 2 diabetes. And so here you have hyperglycemia, you're going to end up with hypertension, hepatic insulin resistance, dyslipidemia, muscle insulin resistance, obesity. And because of the insulin resistance, your brain can't tell that you've eaten, so you are starved. So you eat more. That looks like metabolic syndrome to me. We studied this. What we did was we took 43 children out of our clinic, pediatric obesity clinic at UCSF, all with metabolic syndrome, Latino and African American, high sugar consumers. And what we did was we figured out what they were eating at home on their home diet. We studied them on their home diet. And then we took the added sugar out of their diet. We took their percent calories as sugar from 28% to 10%. We gave them fruit. But otherwise, we gave them food that had no extra added sugar. Everybody got that? So, if you do that, you're going to take 350 to 400 calories out of the diet each day, in which case they're going to be at a caloric deficit, in which case they might lose weight, in which case if they got better, people would say, well, of course they got better, they lost weight. We didn't want them to lose weight. We wanted them to stay the same weight. We wanted to take the sugar out, but we wanted them to stay the same weight. So we had to replace what we were taking out with something else that was equicaloric. We gave them refined starch. We did a starch for sugar exchange. We did a glucose for fructose exchange. In the vernacular, we took the pastries out, we put the bagels in. We took the sweetened yogurt out, we put the baked potato chips in. We took the chicken teriyaki out, we put the turkey hot dogs in. Everybody got it? So we didn't give them good food, we gave them crappy food. We gave them processed food. We gave them kid food. We gave them food kids would eat, but it was no added sugar food. It was bought at Safeway. I mean, it was bought at a standard grocery store. It wasn't like funky food, okay? It was craft food that you buy at the store, that you might have bought last night for yourself, okay? But it was chosen to be no added sugar food. And we gave them a scale. And every day, they would stand on the scale, we'd call them up and say, what'd you weigh? And if they were losing weight, eat more! To keep their weight constant for 10 days. And then we studied them again. Everybody got it? And these are the papers that got published. We've published a fourth one, and we're about to publish a fifth. And this is a cartoon of what we ultimately did. We had fatty liver with fatty acids and triglycerides making VLDL, all bad. 9 days of sugar restriction, again, starch for sugar exchange, no change in calories, no change in weight. The liver fat went down 22%. The de novo lipogenesis went down 50%. Their visceral fat went down 7%. Their triglycerides went down 46%. And most importantly, their beta cells in their pancreas started working again. We reversed their metabolic dysfunction with no change in calories and no change in weight, because a calorie is not a calorie. This has since been replicated by another group at Atlanta and UC San Diego, so we know it's right. And most recently, even the Joslin Diabetes Center has finally gotten on board. This is a study where they actually looked at the mitochondria in animals and showed that glucose and fructose have completely opposite effects on mitochondrial metabolism. And this is a statement from the chief medical officer of the Joslin, who used to be their chief executive officer, one of the most prominent diabetes specialists in the country. The most important takeaway of this study is that high fructose in the diet is bad, says Dr. Khan. It's not bad because it's more calories, but because it has effects on liver metabolism to make it worse at burning fat. As a result, adding fructose to the diet makes the liver store more fat, and this is bad for the liver and bad for whole body metabolism. Thank you, Dr. Khan. It only took you 10 friggin' years. So we have causation, not correlation, causation for sugar and for diseases. Diabetes, heart disease, fatty liver disease, and tooth decay. Slam dunk for diseases. We have correlation, indirect data for sugar and cancer, sugar and dementia. We're working on those. We're not there yet. Okay, I don't care. For diseases, we got enough. American Heart Association knows this. They say get sugar down from 22 teaspoons per day down to 9 for males and 6 for females. I was part of this panel. Okay. Have I debunked a calorie is a calorie? Number 3, it's about personal responsibility. So here's your quiz. Who invented personal responsibility? The British, the French, the Founding Fathers, the Supreme Court, or the tobacco industry? Come on, let's see it. Well, very good. It is indeed the tobacco industry. Okay? It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the Declaration of Independence. It's not in the Magna Carta. Okay? Tobacco industry invented it in 1962 as another reason for you to continue to smoke, because they were getting killed on the science of tobacco and lung cancer. Well, nobody stuck it in your mouth. Nobody lit it for you. Personal responsibility. Liberty interest. Nanny state. That's where nanny state came from. tobacco industry. Well, personal responsibility is an ideology, okay? It is not codified in any document. Now, in order to say something is personal responsibility, there are 4 caveats that have to be met first. The first is you have to have knowledge. If you don't have the knowledge, how can you exercise personal responsibility? Well, guess what? There are 56 names for sugar, and you don't know them. Okay? Did you know Demerara was sugar? Did you know Pinocha was sugar? My favorite is evaporated cane juice. Because after all, cane juice is healthy. It's juice, right? What do you get when you evaporate cane juice? You get sugar. Okay, get the idea? All right. So that's what's in yogurt, because yogurt has a health halo. So they say evaporated cane juice instead of sugar. So yes, yogurt has 7 grams of sugar per container. That's lactose. That's plain yogurt. Okay? But a strawberry yogurt has 23 grams all added. So, yogurt, How about your nutrition facts label? So you'll notice this purple column over here. So we've got percent daily value. So how much is too much or how much is too little for virtually everything on there except for one item. Why is that? Because they don't want you to know how much is too much. Talk about food illiteracy, there it is, right there. Because if you knew how much was in breakfast cereal, there's no way in the world you would ever eat it. And Trump wants to keep it that way because this is what he's done to the 2020 dietary guidelines, okay? So that you won't know about red and processed meat or ultra-processed food, sodium levels, or sugar. Second caveat, access. If you don't have access, how can you exercise personal responsibility? Well, we have food deserts, and that's what this, you've probably heard already about in this Food Literacy for All class. Affordability, you have to be able to afford your choice, and society has to be able to afford your choice. And right now we can't afford this choice. And lastly, externalities. Your choice can't hurt anyone else, because if you're hurting someone else, that's not personal responsibility, that's called anarchy. When I went to medical school in 1980, I learned the old medicine, which was about infections, and the vector was microbes. Today, we learn the new medicine, which is about chronic disease, and the vector is multinational corporations. And just like microbes, they learn resistance. So, remember this slide with processed food being here? Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay the percent of GDP spent on health care for the same period of time. Everybody got it? Ready? What do you see? When processed food entered our lexicon, that's when our healthcare costs started to skyrocket out of control. And our healthcare versus life expectancy started to go all the way down. And I'm not the only one who says this, because this is from Morgan Stanley, okay? Morgan Stanley, global investment bank. This is called the bittersweet aftertaste of sugar, looking at economic productivity here on the y-axis against time here on the x-axis for a low sugar case here in blue, which we do not have, versus a high sugar case, which we do have here in gold. And you'll notice that by the year 2035, we will have reached a 0.0% economic productivity. Now, who is that good for? Is that even good for the food industry? Okay, so we are eating ourselves into oblivion. And remember, this is our life expectancy versus healthcare expenditures. There's processed food there. And this is not by accident. In fact, this has been all planned and engineered by the food industry. And we have the proof, because my colleagues at UCSF, Kristen Carnes, Laura Schmidt, Stan Glantz, found the paper trail, which showed, when they published this in 2016, they showed that in 1965, a literature review published in the New England Journal of Medicine singled out fat and cholesterol as a dietary cause of coronary disease and downplayed evidence that sucrose consumption was also a risk factor. The Sugar Research Foundation set the review's objective, contributed articles for inclusion, and received drafts. The Sugar Research Foundation's funding was not disclosed. It's been a put-up job from the beginning. And this is the reason why for the last 50 years we have focused on fat rather than sugar as being the primary driver of disease, because they wanted you to believe it. And it's true for the dental profession too, because they infiltrated the National Institute of Dental Research study sections and got them to, instead of thinking about nutrition to prevent dental caries, they got them to focus on a dental caries vaccine. So, Susan, how's that dental caries vaccine working?
They told us we'd have no work in 10 years in 1985.
Yeah. Okay. And when they don't like the information that's coming out of the lab, they deep six it, as they did here when they found out that sugar actually caused cancer in animals. Okay, so you got the picture? So now let's talk about what the dark forces do to keep it this way. First of all, here they are, all 10 of them right here, control 90% of the food supply around the world. Basically, if it has a logo, it's one of these guys, because real food doesn't have a logo because they can't afford one. So they start with shoddy science. Let's give you an example. Who here eats SnackWells? Anybody know what SnackWells are? They're still with us. Here's the recipe. 2 grams of fat down, 13 grams of carbohydrate up, 4 grams of which are sugar, 34 calories extra. But they're low fat. Here, the effects of sucrose on metabolic health. This is from the sugar industry. Notice, okay, World Sugar Research Organization. They say 25 studies, 29 papers met inclusion criteria, but varied in quality and duration. Okay? And they say impossible to draw reliable conclusions except with regard to the substitution of sucrose for starch, where the effects were inconsistent, mostly explicable by other factors or non-significant. But they just said that all the stuff was variable, so like, why are they publishing it in the first place? And that's on purpose, because what they're doing is they're diluting the literature, so then they can refer back and say, see, it's inconsistent, and I'll show you that in a minute. Now, the sugar industry likes to say, how can it be about sugar? Because sugar doesn't cause obesity. Because if you look here, here's total consumption of sugar here in black, which reached a peak at around 2000. And in the last 20 years, sugar consumption's gone down, while obesity here in red has gone up. So clearly, if sugar's going down and obesity is going up, how can it be sugar? So this was very, very problematic for us public health researchers. A group at Knoxville, headed by Alexander Bentley, looked at the Wisconsin data very carefully. And what they did was they looked at different ages. They had 46 calendar years and 75 life ages. And what they did was, instead of just looking at a moment in time, they looked at the year before. So they looked at the amount of obesity as one factor, and then the amount of sugar in the next year as a second factor. And when they did that and took this generational time lag into account, and this is the equation they used here, so this one over here, the rho sub t, this is the amount of sugar from this year added on to the obesity from the previous year. Now the model fits beautifully. The same thing. So basically it's 2 functions, not 1. But in both cases, it's the sugar. It's just not 1 function, it's 2. Now, what they also like to do is they like to dilute the literature and then point to the fact that there's no consistency. So here they asked the question, do sugar-sweetened beverages cause weight gain? Yes or no? There are 18 data points. If it was a study published by the food industry, 5 out of 6 said no effect. If it was an independent study, 10 out of 12 said yes effect. My colleague, Dean Schillinger at San Francisco General, looked at one study that was done by the food industry that basically said totally inconsistent, inconclusive, no effect of sugar on either obesity or diabetes. But they didn't say where the study came from. So he went back to all 60 data points and found the 60 studies And what he did was he divvied them up by food company sponsorship. And if a company had sponsored the study, 26 out of 26 said no association. Whereas if it was independently studied, 33 out of 34 said yes association. Everybody got the picture? They have diluted the literature, polluted the literature on purpose so they can refer back and say, see, nothing consistent. Buying scientists. This guy here was the chairman of the Department of Nutrition at Harvard School of Public Health for many years, Dr. Fred Stair. And here is his funding source. It's everywhere, okay? This was done by a graduate student on the back of a napkin, picture taken later, okay? The Center for Consumer Freedom, these are the bad guys, okay? They're hired by the Corn Refiners Association to basically do battle against the Sugar Association because they're battling for market share. Okay? They came out with this thing, when sweet goes sour, confidential documents detail sugar industry's campaign against high fructose corn syrup. So, the Sugar Association hired a company called the Academic Network. There's nothing academic about them. To organize an external scientific advisory committee to basically exonerate sugar. And the Academic Network's president explained that he could provide access to researchers that could influence healthcare policy and consumer opinion. One of those doctors is a colleague of mine, Dr. X, okay, redacted under these blue rectangles, and Dr. Leung knows this doctor very well. Okay? And it says that a review on fructose research would bolster their position. It worked with the Academic Network to provide grant money to Dr. X to write review articles, and it was supported by a grant from the Academic Network, but what they didn't tell you was it was a pass-through from the Sugar Association. They were buying their information. I love this one. I want you to read this, okay? I would add one point, which is that if you receive support from industry or the corn refiner sponsors the event, that cannot be taken as influence unless the speaker is a representative for that organization. The NIH is, in my view, extremely biased in what they fund, but you have to assume that if the authors say that the funding agency is not involved, then that's how it is. Otherwise, we have nothing. Of course, if there's actually evidence of wrongdoing, there are agencies you can take your case to. This is a colleague of mine who happens to be on the board of the Corn Refiners Association. Brian Wansink, a researcher at Cornell, a marketing professor, actually served as the head of the nutrition division at the USDA. A marketing professor served as the head of the nutrition department at the USDA. Now, how effed up is that? Turns out that Dr. Wansink was making up all of his data because he has now been summarily fired and disbarred. This is also a problem. You may have heard about this one in 2015. Anand O'Connor from the New York Times uncovered this global energy balance network that was funded under the table by Coca-Cola. These were the three scientists and the institutions they represented. They were paid $1 million to basically say that obesity was due to lack of exercise. And it hit the New York Times, and that has since gone by the boards and has been disbanded. And the head of nutrition at Coca-Cola basically retired, like within 3 days. This is also a problem. This guy over here, John Sievenpiper, okay, this is a debate that occurred in diabetes care between the forces of good and the forces of evil, if you will. And I want you to take a look at the disclosures for Dr. Sievenpiper over here, okay? And he ignores the studies that actually show proximate cause for sugar and diabetes, because after all, they didn't fit the argument. So I'm going to now play you a clip of Dr. Sievenpiper's feelings on the subject. Let's see if it'll come up. Oh, I don't know if it will come up or not. Let's see. You know what? Okay, it's not playing. He basically said, if there's no... Wait. I didn't do that. Okay. All right. Basically, what he said in the clip is, since NIH is cutting back on research funds, scientists have to go find people who will pay them to do their research. And he takes money from Coca-Cola like crazy. In fact, here we have the web of Coca-Cola funded research, and there is Dr. Stephen Piper down there. Okay? And by the way, there are the other three guys who took the money from the Global Energy Balance Network. How about the CDC? Are they clean? Turns out, not so clean. In fact, Brenda Fitzgerald, the head of the CDC, this is Coca-Cola's page. Solving childhood obesity requires movement. Again, anything but focusing the effort on diet, which I leave you with Upton Sinclair's famous statement: it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Okay? He was the guy who wrote The Jungle, ultimately, started the FDA because of, the meatpacking, finding the meatpacking industry. Co-opting critics. This is the AND, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, okay? Formerly the American Dietetic Association. And that's AND, now a word from our sponsors, are America's nutrition professionals in the pocket of big food. And indeed they are, because 90% of their budget, operating budget, comes from the processed food industry. I was a keynote speaker at the American Academy of Pediatrics meeting in Washington, D.C., and had this in my slide set because the opening ceremonies were sponsored by Coca-Cola. And I was going to show that. And they would not let me on the podium unless I removed the slide. So I could have stood on principle and said, I'm not talking, but I decided that the important information was important enough, so I did take it out, but I'm showing it to you instead. In fact, 96 separate public health organizations taking money from Coke or Pepsi. Weakening government oversight. This is from the Federal Trade Commission against sugar information, a public relations arm of the sugar industry back in 1972. Says, sugar's quick energy can be the willpower you need to eat less. The fat time of day, you're really hungry and ready to eat two of everything. Here's how sugar can help. Ultimately, sugar information was closed down by the FTC. But because that happened, the food industry went ballistic, said, we need lobbyists in Washington. And that's when the American Legislative Exchange Council started, the Heritage Foundation started, the Cato Institute started. And by the year 1980, they had actually gotten so much force that when the FTC tried to stop marketing of junk food to children, called the Kidvid debacle, those lobbying organizations lobbied Congress so severely that ultimately the FTC was declawed and their regulatory authority was taken away. So today, the FTC is only an advisory agency because they don't have an enforcement arm, because Congress took it away from them because of this. Whoops. ILSI, the International Life Sciences Institute, is an outgrowth of Coca-Cola, started by a Coca-Cola employee by the name of Alex Panalpina. And guess what? They're everywhere, including the entire Agriculture Department of China. Market saturation. So we have things like this. Here's your breakfast cereals. Honey Smacks, 56% sugar. And there's Fruit Loops, which is your standard national school breakfast program breakfast at 40% sugar. So if you consume a bowl of Fruit Loops and a glass of orange juice, you have consumed 200% of the sugar allotment per day for an adult, not for a kid. And if you look where it is, it's everywhere. Now, 33% is in soft drinks, fair. 16 to 17% in things you identify as dessert, which means half of the sugar is in things you didn't know had it, like hamburger buns, barbecue sauce, yogurt, salad dressing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So even if you got rid of the stuff you knew, it wouldn't be enough because you'd still be double over your limit. That's the problem, because that's processed food. Because they know when they add sugar, you buy more. That's the goal, for you to buy more. And they've invaded us. This is a children's hospital, okay? Another children's hospital, I love this, Sir Eats a Lot Grilled. Now, what are you telling the kids? AstroTurf groups. So, this is called Citizens for Health. Ain't nothing citizen about it. The executive director is a special counsel to the Senate Select Committee on Food, Nutrition, and Health and the Senate Operations Subcommittee on Government Research. Okay? This is paid for part and parcel by the food industry. This is in the UK, the Institute for Economic Affairs. This is the Cato Institute of the UK. And they put us this thing called Sweet Truth. And this is their executive summary. And if you read through this, there are 9 statements here, and they are all false. Every single one of them is false. And I actually debated the guy who wrote this, Christopher Snowden, and I took him apart limb from limb. I am so proud of myself. And we actually published this piece in a journal, basically saying the science against sugar alone is insufficient in tackling the obesity and type 2 diabetes crises. We must also overcome opposition from vested interests. And there's this whole IEA. And they take money from Tate and Lyle, which is, sugar. Marketing to children. Okay, we're going to do this super fast because I'm looking at the time. Okay, look familiar? Look familiar? Look familiar? How about this? How about this? Drinks are on us. Publix, so this is Florida, is rewarding top grades with free apple juice and soda. Students, we salute your thirst for knowledge. How dumb is that? How about this? How about this? Huh? Spyware. Serious. So this is Simone Barquera, my colleague at the Instituto Nacional de Salud Pública, so they're Public Institute for Public Health in Cuernavaca, Mexico, and one of the people who originated the Mexico soda tax. And this is what he found on his cell phone, put there by an Israeli spyware company driven by the Mexican food industry. Okay, got it? That's the dark forces. So, what are the solutions? Well, the good news is education does have an effect. So this came from IFIC, the International Food Information Council, that's the food industry. And here's what they said. Dr. Robert Lustig's mantra that not all calories were created equal appears to be resonating with more U.S. consumers, with 1/3 of Americans believing that sugars are the source of calories most likely to cause weight gain compared with just 11% 7 years earlier. In fact, here is that food industry survey. And if you take a look, here's 2011, 2018, and you can see carbs up 38% as a cause versus all the same or don't know down 42%. So basically we are educating people to know that a calorie is not a calorie and it is sticking. It does work. More people now know a calorie is not a calorie and that processed food is the problem. And you know who else knows it? Mars, the candy maker, knows it. Because they said Mars supports the dietary guidelines recommendation that consumers reduce their added sugars to no more than 10% of energy intake. And they also said at Mars, we believe it is time for all stakeholders, including industry, to engage in a constructive discussion that focuses on effective approaches to deal with this. Why Mars? Why them? Because they're privately held. They don't have Wall Street quarterly reports. They don't have to justify their earnings. They're privately held. They can take the long view. So this is being driven by Wall Street. But, having said that, guess who also now agrees with that? Coca-Cola. Why? Because of the Global Energy Balance Network. They are a pariah. Everybody knows they are the bad guys, and so they had to cave, and they did, finally. Pepsi, though, did not. Okay? Government asked Pepsi to cut sugar content. This is the government of India because they have an 11% diabetes prevalence. And so the government of India went to Indra Nooyi, who is Indian, from Catholic University, Madras, India, and said, you have to change the formulation of Pepsi-Cola in India to stop the diabetes epidemic in India. And guess what? Nada. Here's another global investment bank, Credit Suisse, published Sugar Consumption at a Crossroads. And here's what they said. This is a global investment bank saying, we believe higher taxation on sugary food and drinks will be the best option to reduce sugar intake and help fund the fast-growing healthcare costs associated with type 2 diabetes and obesity. A global investment bank is calling for taxation. Now, how effed up is that? In fact, the International Diabetes Federation told the G20 to tax sugar to save lives and money. But that's the International Diabetes Federation, because their member countries, the 198 member countries, are so poor they can't even afford the refrigerator to put the insulin in, never mind the insulin. They have to be interested in prevention. But Diabetes UK, they got money, so what do they say? With type 2 diabetes, we know sugar doesn't directly cause it, but you're more likely to get type 2 diabetes if you are overweight. Again, about calories and obesity. The reason? Because they took 500,000 pounds from Pepsi, that's why. But they have a UK sugar tax. And the WHO is trying to get taxes around the world. And there are now 28 countries, 6 American cities, except for Chicago, who repealed it because the city council got bought off. So question number 1. Can our toxic environment be changed without government or societal intervention, especially when there are potentially addictive substances involved? Question 2. Can we afford to wait to enact these public health measures when healthcare will be bankrupt due to chronic metabolic disease? And question 3, can 6-month-old obese babies change the medical profession or the food industry or Washington? 6-month-olds don't decide what they're going to consume. So we have to advance the public health. We have to educate the public about real food, which is what I'm doing right now. We have to get business on board. We need government agency action. Just remember, politicians lead from behind. You need more votes than dollars. So that's why we need more people to understand this. Only one presidential candidate even mentioned the word food in the entire of all the debates, and that was Marianne Williamson. Think about it. And legal recourse. So in conclusion, this is a public health crisis because it's an exposure. An exposure. It's not about calories. If I put cocaine in the food, the same thing would happen. Okay? But that's illegal. But sugar is not. They found a legal addiction, which is toxic. And it's true even in normal weight people. Processed food is the exposure. The food industry has adulterated our food supply for profit. The industry has bought off scientists and co-opted critics. Most of the checks and balances have been eroded, and government has been complacent and in some cases complicit, because they get money too from the tariffs, $56 billion a year, and our best chance is public education, business, and legal action. Here's one example. At UCSF, we've gotten rid of soft drinks from campus. And do you know who did that? Cindy and me. We did that. You could do that here too, and should. I saw your vending machine out there. Work on it. And here's the data. Okay, we published it in JAMA Internal Medicine back in October. Okay, and it's we cut its consumption in half, and it's durable. And it wasn't just at work; they cut it at home too, and they got metabolically healthier. We have the data to show it. Proposal number 2, let's rename type 2 diabetes to what it really is. Processed food disease. Oh, you got processed food disease. How would that be when you went to your doctor's office? Would that be a wake-up call? Would that be a teaching moment? No one knows what diabetes is anyway. It's an Egyptian word, means siphon. Did you know that? Okay, because you're in the bathroom peeing your friggin' brains out. Did you know that? Processed food disease, woo. Maybe you'd think about that. Proposal number 3, we got to get rid of the subsidies for food. No economist on the planet believes in food subsidies because they distort the market. And if you did that, then commodity crops would not be subsidized, and therefore they wouldn't end up in our food supply. which is killing us. Maybe we could subsidize radishes or broccoli instead, so that people could afford them. Proposal number 4, Eat Real, our nonprofit. Okay, this is now fruit as of 2 weeks ago. Hash browns are now fruit, according to the Trump administration. Okay, we have several school districts around the country that are working with us to get real food into schools. We have a 4th grade curriculum to teach kids how to cook, knife skills, in the cafeteria, on purpose, because education alone is not enough. You need education plus implementation. Those are 2 different sets of skills. Okay? And the kids can be the positive disruptive force in the house. So when the parent goes to the store and the kid says, hey, there's an artichoke, I want that for dinner, and the mom says, I don't know how to cook an artichoke. Yeah, but I do. And now all of a sudden, you've got a force that can actually do something. This was loaned to me by Cindy tonight. This is her kids' school teaching the alphabet. Now, who here is okay with that? This is Ann Arbor, people. Get with the friggin' program. Proposal number 5, let's take fructose off the generally recognized as safe list because it ain't safe. Not in the doses we are currently using. And actually, that's under consideration by Center for Science and the Public Interest to make it into a national campaign. So, big food has its poisonous propaganda, but with effective science and with effective communication, we can have the end of big food. There are public resources to help you. sugarscience.org, 8,000 clinical research articles vetted by 12 independent scientists, of which I am one, and distilled into 5 messages for the public to explain exactly what's going on to their food supply. You can get this online. My website, robertlustig.com, we have infographics that can be posted anywhere. We have this one here, a calorie is not a calorie, and explains all of it. And it is big, so you need to go to Kinko's to print it out. This is a poster that we developed, took a year to assemble on metabolic syndrome signaling. All the kinases, all the second messengers, all the transcription factors throughout all the organs in the body, focusing on the liver, because it's the liver fat that drives the disease. Fed Up, a documentary that explains how we got to where we are today, produced in 2014. Sugar Coated, a documentary that explains why we got to where we are today. The Subterfuge, the public relations campaign. This was produced in 2015. Sweet Revenge is a public television special that explains how people can reverse their type 2 diabetes without medicine just by eating real food, and why. I think that's it. So with that, we have just a little bit of time for questions, but I want to thank you all for your attention, and I hope you got it.
Quick reminder, when you ask a question, just please say who you are. If you're a student, community attendee, just give us a sense of who you are.
I'm Brian, and I'm a student. And I was just curious, based on with your talk, what you think, how much, if any, sugar is safe, and what types, like fruit and all those.
Okay, so is any sugar safe? And the answer is if it comes with fiber, it's safe. And so fruit is okay. Fruit juice is not, because the fiber's been strained out. So why is fiber important? So there are 2 kinds of fiber. There's soluble and insoluble. Soluble is like pectins, like what holds jelly together. Insoluble is like cellulose, like the stringy stuff in celery. Fruit has both. When you consume fruit, What happens is that the cellulose forms a lattice work on the inside of your intestine like a fishnet, and the soluble fiber, like the pectins, plug the holes in the fishnet, so you end up with an insoluble, impenetrable secondary barrier lining the inside of your duodenum to prevent and delay sugar absorption early on in the duodenum, so it doesn't go straight to your liver, so your liver doesn't get the tsunami that turns everything into liver fat. So you're protecting your liver. And if you're not absorbing it early, that means it's going further down the intestine to the next part called the jejunum, where the microbiome is, where the bacteria are. And they chew it up for their purposes. So even though you ate it, you didn't get it, because your bacteria did. So a calorie is not a calorie, because if it came with fiber, it wasn't for you, it was for your bacteria. So fruit is okay because you are protecting your liver and feeding your gut. And those are the definitions of healthy. Any food that protects your liver and feeds your gut is healthy. Any food that does not do either of those is poison, and any food that does one or the other but not both is kind of in the middle. So fruit is okay, but fruit juice, because it doesn't have the fiber, is not. Huh? Honey. Honey is just sugar with a fancy name. Hi, Susan.
A lot of my patients ask me about sugar substitutes, particularly stevia for metabolic and also xylitol, which is anti-carcinogenic.
Right.
Can you speak to any of the substitutes that
Sure.
would be helpful?
Sure. So everybody wants to know about sugar substitutes. Me too. So here's what we know. We know that they do not cause liver fat. That is true. They do not cause liver fat, but they still generate an insulin response. And that insulin response still generates weight gain. So there are several studies now that have looked at the effect of diet sweeteners on metabolic health. And what I would argue, to try to take all the studies that we have and bring it into one sentence, okay? Otherwise this will take too long to go through, all of them. But one sentence: the toxicity of one Coca-Cola equals the toxicity of 2 Diet Coca-Colas. So it's half as bad, but it's still bad. And I can give you the data on why that is if you want, if maybe later, afterward. Trying to get through enough questions.
Hi, my name's Claire. I am not in this class, but I'm in the School of Social Work. And a lot of people criticize sugar taxes for disproportionately affecting low-income populations,
Yep.
especially those who are targeted intentionally by those companies and who live in food deserts.
Yep.
So I'm wondering what your response to are sugar taxes.
Right. So, two issues. So, did everyone hear the question? Sugar taxes, regressive against the poor. I'll tell you what's more regressive against the poor: type 2 diabetes. That's way more aggressive against the poor. Now, it sounds paternalistic. It sounds nanny state, right? Except for one thing. If you're actually trying to solve a problem, you have to, administer it across the board. And since they're the ones getting the most, and you know where they're getting the most from? SNAP, from food stamps. 40% of all the purchases on food stamps are sugar beverages, shown by the USDA. Also, Freedom of Information Act from Anahad O'Connor from the New York Times. So the question is that okay? Is it okay to poison the population and then say, all right, yeah, but we're going to institute a sugar tax? Now, I will be very honest with you. I don't really like the sugar tax, and I'll tell you why. Because it's really 3 taxes in one. It's not 1 tax, it's 3. The first tax is the subsidy. Because if you're subsidizing one thing, that means you're taxing everything else, because you have to make book. If you're, reducing the price of one thing, that means you're raising the price on everything else. So that's a tax. Second is also a tax. We just don't call it a tax. It's called a premium. It's your insurance premium, because you and your employer are paying $2,751 per year for obesity-related health care that you wouldn't have to pay if we didn't have this problem. So that is coming out of your pocket. So that's a tax. And then finally, the tax itself. So we have 3 taxes instead of 1, and all of them could be could go away if we just got rid of the subsidies. Because then things would find their correct price, and then you wouldn't have to tax it, because it wouldn't have been subsidized in the first place. It makes absolutely no sense to subsidize something and then tax it. That really makes no sense to me. Okay? So let's get rid of it and have everybody with an equal playing field and have no disease. So that's what I would say. But in the absence of that, given the Farm Bill, given the reticence in Washington to be able to do something, then the tax is the most effective way of dealing with the low-hanging fruit, as it were, to try to fix the problem right now. Because getting rid of subsidies, that's going to be a really heavy lift. Does that make sense? Okay.
Hi, I'm Molly, and I'm a student. I was curious, you mentioned Jamie Oliver earlier.
Yep.
Have you encountered any of the same obstacles that he showed in Food Revolution in your work with Eat Real? And if not, what strategies did you use to combat or overcome that?
Okay, so we've find a lot of the same things. When he went to West Virginia, they thought, he showed them how they make chicken nuggets, and they went, woo, yeah, I'll still eat them. Yeah, we see that. Although in California, it's a little bit better, because, a little bit more of a food culture, not quite as bad, and, they're, shall we say, some, nutritionally savvy people out there. So it's not quite as bad. But, we get the same thing, and there are plenty of school districts, who do not get it. Okay? And so, trying to make inroads to get people to get it is always at a premium. So yes, what do? We have data. That's what we do. There are people who would like to ignore the data, but we have data. Okay? And if you can remove 270,000 pounds of sugar from a school district and still cost the same amount in terms of the food, people will listen.
I want to thank everybody. Thank you for your questions. Let's give a round of applause to Dr. Robert Lustig. Thank you so much.